Thank you for tuning in. I'm Dan Kornhauser, and I am here with my co-host Sam Teets. Sam, welcome back. Guys, welcome back to the NFL Draft Show. We've taken a long hiatus post-NFL Draft, crazy summer, crazy start of the NCAA football season and the NFL season. There's been a lot going on, but before we jump into anything, Sam, welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Dan. I mean, we took a pretty substantial break, and now we're back. But I feel like it was a good timing, though, because now we're in the middle of this college football season where we have a lot of storylines, and we're not talking out of our rear ends about some of these prospects. We actually had the time to look at them, and we've also seen how they played so far this year. So we actually have some games from this season to talk about versus talking about Anthony Richardson when we've seen him play a total of 5 games in the summer or something like that. Now we actually have a substantial body of work to go off of.
Yes. So, I mean, with that, that's a hell of a segue. It's almost like we've done this before. But that's a hell of a segue, dude, talking about Anthony Richardson, because we're going to talk about the position that everybody loves. Everyone loves to talk about it. Everyone loves to break it down. We love the highlights, and it's the most important position on the field. We are, of course, going to be talking about the quarterback position. We are back. First show. Might as well do it right. So, Sam, let me ask you a question. We are now, 8 weeks into this college football season? And a lot has changed, at least for me, on my quarterback big board. But what does your board look like at this point compared to the beginning of the season? Is it drastically different? Are you surprised at your board at the moment? Tell me about it.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised by the top 3 guys. I think after that, I'm a little surprised, especially because now there's a lot of guys who I originally thought were going to declare for this class who probably will just go back to school. And there are a lot of guys who I thought, maybe they got a chance of getting picked who now we know are just going to be UDFAs essentially. So it's changed up a lot. We went into this draft class in the summer talking about how this could be a historically good quarterback class. Some of these guys hit. Well, most of them are not hitting currently. It's an issue where it was kind of a boomer bust class, and everyone's being optimistic that at least we'll get a few of these guys who are going to come in and really break out. And we haven't seen that. Most of them have not broken out to the level we were expecting. You mentioned a guy like Anthony Richardson. I'll bring in someone like Cam Ward later on the show who plays for Washington State, who's playing tonight against Utah. Potentially a big game to watch later on. Like those 2 guys, I mean, they've shown all the tools. They had good games, but I don't think they put it together to the point where you consider them first-round picks. So this board, to me, is drastically different than I had it going into the year, because I have dropped a lot of guys who I thought would have been at least in consideration for day 2, maybe consideration for late round 1 if they played well. But the top of it, the very top 3 guys are fairly similar to what I had going into the year.
So let's touch on a couple of those things you had just said. So let's start with the top 3. I think it's pretty clear the top 3 in no particular order are C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, and Will Levis.
That's what I have, yeah.
Levis. I'm never going to get these names right. I'm sorry. But yes, so those are the top 3. Now, you had then mentioned guys that you had at a certain point up on your board, and now they've dropped to UDFAs or lower or whatever. What are the names of some of these guys that you had higher on your board at the beginning of the season that after 7-8 games that they now sit disappointingly lower?
Yeah, so I think it starts for me with Phil Dracovic from Boston College, who I believe, I don't have the report pulled up right now because it would take just a lot of clicking around to get to, but from Boston College, Notre Dame transfer, I had him, I believe, graded as a late round 2, early round 3 quarterback in the summer. Mm-hmm. And he's come out, and he had, I think, maybe 1 good game this year, I think, against Louisville, but other than that, he really has been disappointing. Granted, he's not working with a very good offensive line. Their offensive line, frankly, has a bunch of converted defensive linemen on it, so he's not working with a lot in Boston. But his 1 good year was the COVID season, which we know has been fluky for some guys. That was his 1 good year. He was injured a lot last year. He didn't have much tape before 2020, and he has not played that well this year. So in my opinion, someone like Phil Dracovic, who people were talking about being a potentially day 2 guy, I'm not drafting him at this point. I just don't think you can touch him based on what he's done so far this year. Looking at some other guys, Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, who I know got injured this past weekend, but he got benched at one point. I think it was the Texas A&M game for Jeff Garcia. And he's had a few, actually, he's bounced back since that game and had a few decent performances, but nothing like what he was doing last year. And granted, there were a lot of missed throws last year, but we assumed he would develop a little bit more and be a little bit better this year with the full offseason working as a starting quarterback, and he had a lot of big-time throws last year. He hasn't done that this year at all. So Tyler Van Dyke is a guy who doesn't have to come out this year and certainly won't. I believe he's a redshirt sophomore this year. I expect him to return to school, and we won't be talking much about him going forward. Jake Haener, I feel bad for this guy because it's really not his fault. He's been injured, hasn't really played this year. This was a guy, some people who broke out last year, people were talking about, yeah, it could be this nice mid-round guy this year. Doesn't have the most talented arm, but was flashing last year against some really good programs. And just not playing this year, again, not his fault, but he's not really been on the field. And in this quarterback class, there are still a bunch of guys competing for those early day 3, late day 2 spots. And with Haener not playing, it's really hard to get a feel for where he would go in these situations. 2 other names, Brennan Armstrong from Virginia has been awful this year.
Yeah.
And Spencer Rattler from South Carolina has been the worst version of Spencer Rattler you could possibly have drummed up going into this season.
Which is saying a lot considering how bad he looked at Oklahoma before transferring.
Yeah, but at least in Oklahoma, you could look at the box scores and say, oh, there's some hope here. You can't even look at the box scores anymore and just say it. I mean, looking at the tape and box scores, they're both bad for Spencer Rattler at this point.
Now, there's a couple names that I didn't hear. Devin Leary, for example, from NC State, who some are pegging as a potential first-round pick. I'm not buying it, but I have seen his name in some mock drafts hovering around like the late first, early second. I'm currently looking at your big board, and he's down a ways. Why don't you touch on that for me for a second? Why the big disconnect between a guy like Devin Leary from NC State? You have him at number 150 on your big board that you just released. That's your October big board. You brought it out. Actually, you debuted it on my birthday, October 9th. So happy birthday to me for with your big board. But you have him at number 150. I've seen him, like I said, at the back end of first round mocks already. Why the huge disconnect there for you?
Yeah, and happy belated birthday to you, Dan. I didn't know I would have sent you a message, but yeah, Leary to me, and that big board is about a month old, so I'm going to be releasing a newer one that's going to actually have a lot of movement because we know this year there's been a lot of change in the past month or so. Even someone like Jalen Hyatt, the receiver from Tennessee, breaking out, who will show up pretty high on the next board. But Leary, who has been injured now, I think he's done for the year if I recall, so that's going to probably hurt him a little bit even more going forward. He won't really have a chance to improve his draft stock. This is another guy who's really efficient and usually very accurate with his passes, doesn't make a lot of mistakes, fairly poised in the pocket, but he doesn't have the arm talent. This is an excellent college quarterback, but in a similar vein as Jake Haener, not a guy who's going to hit all the NFL throws, not a guy who's going to really wow you, and someone you don't view in the NFL as a player who's going to be able to take your team to the next level. You know, you have, I think the Draft Network is famous for saying this, you have trucks and you have trailers. The truck is the one driving the situation. Patrick Mahomes is a truck. Josh Allen is a truck. And you have trailers, guys who are just there kind of in the back. Something like a Mac Jones, I guess you could say, or a Jameis Winston at this point. And someone like a Devin Leary is a trailer. I mean, he's just not going to be the guy who's going to be driving the show for you. That being said, there's value for him. I think NFL teams having someone like that as a backup. But even look at New England this year with Mac Jones. Look at what the situation's going on with him right now. I mean, I think the Patriots are realizing they have some issues at quarterback necessarily. I'm not saying they're going to trade Mac Jones, but I'm saying they realize they have pigeonholed themselves into a very small situation. And that's what you do when you pick up these guys. So to me, Leary does not have the upside of being a starter in the NFL and doesn't have the physical upside of being a guy you would look at as potentially being a franchise quarterback. Not to mention his first game of the season against ECU, which I watched, was pretty awful. I mean, he's rebounded since then, but against East Carolina, he had, I think, everything going wrong for him. He was complete opposite of what they pitched him as this really efficient guy. He had multiple turnovers, multiple plays that should have been turnovers that maybe were dropped. So for me, Devin Leary is a high floor player, but not a guy you would view as an NFL starter. And because of that, I don't think he's going to be worth a top 100 pick. Now,
that's going to lead us to another question and topic I wanted to touch on. And I'm actually glad you brought it up so I didn't have to. But before I do, I want to remind you guys that we are brought to you by betting.net. Betting.net is your best bet for sportsbook and casino sites. So head on over to betting.net. Now, you were just talking about like trucks and trailers, guys who lead and guys who are kind of just brought along for the ride. I love analogies as much as the next guy. But that was just a fancy analogy for essentially what one could call game manager quarterbacks versus franchise quarterbacks, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I ask that because this is a very sensitive topic for me. Because on the Wednesday show that I co-host with my good pastor, and Steve Risley, sorry, I don't want to forget about Steve. Mike and I typically butt heads on quarterbacks. And on last night's show, we spent like 10 minutes or so talking about this topic. We're not going to have that much time to talk about this, but I did want to bring it up tonight because we are talking about quarterbacks. We are talking about the NFL draft. And Mike and I had a very interesting debate going back and forth where essentially what I took from it is he doesn't believe the term what's the word I'm looking for? He thinks that like franchise quarterbacks is clear, but he thinks when it comes to game manager types that's just an armchair quarterbacks thing. That's just a fantasy football term or something like that. He doesn't think it's something that's real because his argument was technically all quarterbacks are game managers because you don't want them to turn the ball over. You want them to convert key third downs and play within the spectrum of the offense, play within the scheme. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. That I'm dumbing it down a bit, but that's essentially where he was going, that all quarterbacks are game managers. So he thinks it's BS when I call guys like Bailey Zappi, Mac Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Kirk Cousins, I call those game manager types because, similar to your analogy, I think that they're more along for the ride than they are leading the team. No one is ever going to look at any of those a team led by a guy like that and say, oh, man, they're really good because they're quarterback. Even the Vikings right now, who may very well be the second best team in the NFC at this point in the season, according to some, even now, when you think about the Vikings, would you say that Kirk Cousins is the reason they're so good?
No.
He's playing well. Yes, he's playing very well. The stats are nice, and they're winning. That's all that matters. But there's a huge difference between these types of quarterbacks. Like you said, a Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow. These are franchise quarterbacks. These are guys that you would trust to not only build your team around, but if you're in trouble, if you're down 10 going into the fourth quarter, you're pretty confident that you have the guy to bring you back. And that's something that I think is worth discussing when it comes to analyzing these quarterbacks, because as NFL teams do, they have hundreds of draft meetings throughout the year, in the offseason, leading up to the draft, etc. And I'm sure they have these conversations just like you and I are right now. Like, okay, how about this guy? What do you think about him? How about this guy? So on and so forth, going down the list. And scouts have their favorite guys, coaches have their favorite guys, and GMs have their guys. But how important is it when you're looking at quarterbacks, when you're looking at their physical traits on tape and stuff like that? Because obviously we don't know about their character. How important is it when you're looking at a guy and how he looks on film, how he looks on tape, how he looks game to game? How much of a factor is that idea that you have this in your head that is this a franchise guy or is this a game manager type? How much does that heavily weigh in the analysis?
Well, I think you can split because you do have some guys who are not the most physically talented that can become franchise quarterbacks. You look at a Joe Burrow, for example, or a Tom Brady, even if you want to go back to that one. Those are guys who obviously are super talented, but maybe don't have all the physical tools you would look for in a superstar quarterback, but are obviously really talented. Brady, this year, is kind of fallen apart for him, but in the past, easily been a top 5 quarterback for 20 plus years. Joe Burrow is a top 5 quarterback right now, maybe even third or fourth best in the NFL. So I do think that physical traits play a role in that. I think there's a qualifying factor, but there are guys who kind of buck the trend. And someone like Bryce Young this year has potential to buck the trend. I'm going to be very, very cautious. I'm very glad I don't have to make this decision. I always say I'm very glad I get to sit back here and not make the decisions myself. But someone like Bryce Young, in terms of being a gamer, and being that kind of like franchise guy. He makes the game-winning plays when you need him to. He's got steps up in big moments. He has these moments where he's kind of like has a guy blitzing free off the edge. He'll duck under him. He'll scramble 10 yards. He'll make a play downfield. He has those it factor moments. Mm-hmm. And you don't see it for a ton of guys in this class, frankly. So Bryce Young kind of does buck the system. But that being said, if you have the physical tools like an Anthony Richardson or Will Levis or a Cameron Ward, who has got maybe the strongest arm of anyone in this draft class, yeah, that's going to really help you out quite a bit. That's going to get a lot of eyes on you. So I think it's a big factor. The physicality is a huge factor in terms of determining who's going to get their time in the spotlight, but it certainly isn't everything. I'd be interested to know Mike's take on Will Levis, actually, because Will Levis is a guy who I have QB3 on my board. But I have him, I think I have him in the 40s or 30s. Let me find out where I have him real quick. I have him 39. And that's going to change because I'm making a new board here very soon. Well, I have him 39. I don't have him valued as a first-round pick right now. I have two guys valued as first-round picks in Stroud and Bryce Young. Mm-hmm. So I do think we have to put some qualifying factors out there. Well, I do think when you look at a lot of the guys in the NFL right now who are like the superstars or have been the superstars, and Aaron Rodgers has a cannon for an arm. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes have cannons for arms they can create with their legs. Joe Burrow is kind of the outlier right now in terms of not having the strongest arm. Still has a really good arm, but he's accurate. He's precise. He drops the ball in small windows downfield. He hits the vertical games pretty well with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and those guys. There's a lot he does well in that sense. He's a very polished player. Same can be said about Tom Brady in previous years. Lamar Jackson at times is a superstar elite quarterback with his ability to run. And sometimes he does have the big explosive passing game, so not within this past month. So I do think the physical abilities play into it, certainly. And teams are always looking for that guy now, especially right now. They're looking for the guy who's a dual threat. They're looking for a guy who has all the traits to hit that 60-yard throw. But there are players who will buck the trend, and Bryce Young is going to try to be one of those guys this year.
Now, you say that, but let's be honest. Sure, Bryce doesn't have the howitzer arm of a Josh Allen or a Levis, but the man is right. Bryce Young has very little holes to his game right now. And I know people look at it and say, oh, he's just another Alabama quarterback. We've seen these before. Not quite right. He's got all the talent in the world around him, multiple first-round picks on offense. And you know what? Those arguments are valid. They are definitely valid, and they are definite things. But I like evaluating Bryce Young because he is the perfect example of a player to look at what he does, not necessarily those around him. Normally, that's reserved for quarterbacks who maybe don't statistically perform up to par or aren't winners in college because they're on bad teams, bad programs, whatever. But you know they have the physical talent, and you know they have NFL potential, starter NFL potential. But on the flip side, talking about it with a guy like Bryce Young, a likely top 5 pick, potential QB1, people say these things as a bad thing against him. Like it's a bad thing that he has these guys around him, but it's not just, that he's got really great players around him, because let's be honest, his Alabama receivers are not doing him any favors this season, as he's got one of the highest drop percentages in the nation of the qualified quarterbacks, and of the draft-worthy guys, he's got the most drops of those top guys by his receivers. So his receivers aren't doing him any help on that end. And let's be honest, there's no Devonta Smiths, there's no Jameson Williams is out there. There's no Jalen Waddles. Like Alabama,
this is the least talented Alabama offense in a long time,
and he still looks as efficient as ever. Yes, he's small, but is his lack of height, lack of weight, lack of girth really something to hold against him if everything else is there?
It's tough because he is a historical outlier. I think the Athletic just wrote an article on it today. There's been maybe like 3 quarterbacks in the past 25 years that meet his height and weight that would mirror him, and none of them were even close to being first-round picks. So I think it's going to be interesting. This is really an unprecedented draft situation where you could have someone like Bryce Young go in the first round. In the modern era, we have never seen a quarterback that small go that high. Now, is he still going to go top 10? Yeah, he's probably going to go top 10 based on what he's done at Alabama. I just think it'll be interesting. Again, a situation I'm glad where I don't have to make this selection for an actual team and put my job in the line, because I really don't know how it's going to work out. The tape says this guy could be really good. I don't like just helmet scout. The Alabama offensive system, I will say, just translate better to the NFL than, say, the Ohio State system or the Tennessee system. You want to talk about C.J. Stroud or Hendon Hooker. Some real concerns about them transitioning to the NFL, going from their college offenses to pro-style offenses. I don't think that's as big of a deal for Bryce Young in Alabama. But it's, like I said, it's a bigger deal for some other guys in this draft class.
And Joseph Michael chiming in. Thanks for watching, Joe. He says the NFL the draft show is back. Hell yeah. Hashtag NFL draft. Hashtag Dan and Sam. Hashtag the boys are back. So you say it's unprecedented, but it isn't. We just saw Kyler Murray go first overall a couple of years ago. The man's 5'10", 190 pounds, soaking wet. Yes,
Bryce Young's gonna be 180. Bryce Young will be 180. Bryce Young will be 180.
Well, it's not unprecedented. We've seen it. I mean, I think we are in a revolution of sorts when it comes to the NFL and how the NFL looks at quarterbacks, particularly because the thing back in the 90s and the early 2000s was, take the statuesque quarterback, tall, 6'4", 6'5", 230 pounds, big arm, reads the field, not mobile. Now, half the league has mobile quarterbacks, and it seems like the mobile quarterbacks, the guys who can move around, are moving up the quarterback hierarchy a lot faster than the guys who aren't. Not to say that, obviously winning from the pocket is dying, because it's not. That's how you win football games. You got to win from within the frame of the offense in the pocket. But mobility is being valued at an all-time high. Scheme versatility is being valued at an all-time high. That's why we have a guy like Lamar Jackson winning an MVP at quarterback. That's why we have a Kyler Murray getting a big fat contract extension at 5'10", 190 pounds, soaking wet. Like, the NFL is no longer looking at that. So it does open up a door for a guy like Bryce Young. But me personally, I don't care if this guy comes in at 175, 5'9", okay? I don't care. There's just some things that players have that you don't look past. And Bryce Young is one of those quarterbacks that I think has that factor, that it factor to him, that eye test that he passes. And I remember watching Deshaun Watson at Clemson and seeing him. Now, he's not a small quarterback, 6'2", 220. He's not a small guy. He's similar to, let's say, an RG3-sized quarterback. When he was in the national championship game against Alabama, every single time he got hit, I felt like every hit, he would just spin in the air or get tossed 5 or 10 yards back or all twisted up and land awkwardly and shit. He was getting beat up. He got up every time. And I remember watching that, and one of my buddies I was sitting was like, dude, when he goes to the NFL, if he gets hit like that, he's not getting up. I mean, it hasn't mattered. You know what I'm saying? In the NFL, he still takes those hits, and he still goes flailing about. But, it doesn't matter. Kyler Murray, small as shit. Doesn't matter. I mean, sure, the injury question is always there. But if the guy can put it there, if he's a leader, if he knows how to operate inside the pocket, which Bryce Young does, you want to point to things like his height and weight. You want to say, his feet get a little happy when there's pressure. His mechanics are a little lazy at times.
Yeah, he's a little toesy in the pocket.
He's got that twinkle toes going on. That's fine. You can coach that. You can work on that. So for me, Bryce Young at this point is my QB1. As much as I love C.J. Stroud, and I love Stroud, I think Stroud's going to be great in the league. He is nothing like Justin Fields. I love C.J. Stroud. But for me, Bryce Young is my number 1. And before we move on, I want to remind you guys your top sportsbook comparison site is betting.net. Betting.net offers extensive reviews on the best sportsbooks out there, so you don't have to. Head on over to betting.net. With that, I brought up Stroud. You've mentioned Levis. We're talking about Bryce. Who's your QB1 right now?
Yeah, so my draft board, it's about a month old now. On the updated one, I'm going to have Bryce Young my number 1 quarterback. And I'm going to have Stroud number 2. So I was able to do a deep dive with members of the Draft Network. We were able to sit on a call. We did a deep dive on Stroud. And it was, I mean, there's a lot of mechanical issues there, which we kind of knew. There are some issues regarding his post-snap reads. Pre-snap is pretty good, but some post-snap reads he has troubles with. Of course, you're talking about the college offense again, transitioning from Ohio State to the NFL. That's proven difficult for some guys in the past. And when you watch him in the pocket, there are some concerns. He's a little toesy with his feet. He doesn't necessarily get his full body lined up when he's trying to throw the ball. There's some throws that maybe hangs out there a little too much. So there's some issues there in terms of his footwork for the most part. It's mostly lower body mechanics that we're worried about. His shoulder does dip a little bit sometimes in some throws. So we have to make some adjustments there. And in terms of seeing the full field and reading the field, that's also a little bit concerning. So there are some post-snap reads that he just misses open guys, or also where he doesn't see the defenders. He kind of puts the ball in harm's way. So there are some issues we have to talk about there. Not a guy who I would consider like by any means generational prospect. He's kind of just your average first-round dude, in my opinion. That being said, of course, your average first-round dude at this point is a top 10 draft selection. If you play quarterback, that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
I do like him. I'm still going to have him probably be a top 10 guy on my big board overall. I had him third in October. I'm going to have him probably still be in the top 10 in November. Just is not particularly great draft class, just at the top overall. But yeah, I like Stroud. I do. But I'm just not. Both these guys, Stroud and Young, have a lot of question marks this year. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could go wrong with them transitioning to the NFL. And I'm a little more aware of it this year because I have built out the full player profiles. I did this in the summer, and now I'm getting to watch it all happen live during the season. But I think they have more question marks this year among the top two guys than I have in the top two of past draft classes. Save last year where we had one quarterback go in the entire first round.
So bad. But that's the one thing I do love about the NFL draft and the whole NFL draft process is because I actually was talking about Bailey Zappi with Mike a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling him some of my concerns of Zappi coming out. And one of my concerns on the flip side, Mike was like, what? No, I disagree. I think he's great in that aspect of the game. You know, stuff like that. Two people can watch the same game, watch the same film, watch the same quarterback, and come up with different things, come up with different analysis of that player and how he would fit. So that's
Mike liked Zappi coming out. Mike called me one night. I was like, hey, this guy might be like one of the better dudes in this class. We had talked about it. I'm like, yeah, he's good. He's good in the aspects he was asked to do in college, obviously. I mean, super productive at Western Kentucky, but I don't know. Like, again, do I view him as a guy who's going to be like a franchise quarterback who's going to lead you to like have a chance to win a Super Bowl with, unless you have like a fantastic defense? Probably not.
Well, couldn't agree more, bud. Could not agree more. Zappi and other average quarterbacks like that, Mike seems to like because they're safe and they don't turn the ball over and stuff like that. They are the game managers or whatever. Now, I don't know if that's because they're coaching him. You know, coaches tend to not want the quarterbacks to be reckless and stay with him.
I think it's absolutely part of the coaching. He would, because there's some of the stuff like I think Will Levis will drive him freaking insane. Like, I think there's some stuff that Will Levis does and Cameron Ward too, like that these guys in this draft class do that will drive Mike up a wall. Like he will not be having it. He will not be having it. He will be so annoyed to watch those guys and see some of the stuff they do.
Now, I like that you brought that up because when I watch the film and I'm watching these games or whatever, I think about it as if I were the GM. And I'm thinking about it like when we look back at even like Trey Lance, for example, right? The whole situation in San Francisco. Quarterback with a lot of questions. No doubt about it. Stats were pretty, big arm, athletic, has that build, fits that mold of the modern quarterback, but there were a lot of concerns. I understood why San Francisco made that move. Mike blew it up, hated it, just absolutely shat on it, shat on the quarterback, shat on the trade up, just all of it. And then that's always a point of contention. NFL teams don't want safe quarterbacks. Safe quarterbacks don't win chips. And that's just a matter of fact. Game managers don't win chips. You could look back at the last 22 years. Look back since 2000. How many game managers would you say, how many quarterbacks that you would list as game managers of those 22 Super Bowl winning quarterbacks? What? Brad Johnson, uh, Trent Dilfer,
Manning, last year Manning, Flacco.
Joe Flacco. But even
So
with
I would say
Flacco,
probably 4 or 5. 4 or 5,
maybe even Nick Foles with the Eagles.
Yeah, Nick Foles. Yeah.
So even if you want to say 4 max, that's not good odds. You're not talking about, and even the losing quarterbacks aren't game managers. Even the losing quarterbacks are upper echelon guys. I mean, like, look at last year. Stafford went in during the regular season, 40 plus touchdowns, quietest 40 touchdowns ever in NFL history during the regular season. And Joe Burrow, like you said, top 3 quarterback in the NFL right now. You know, and you go back, the years Tom Brady won, or the year Tom Brady lost, or Peyton Manning, or Aaron Rodgers, Ben Roethlisberger, Eli Manning. Like, these are franchise types. That's what you're looking for. And part of that reason is why I think guys like Anthony Richardson, I mean, he's the biggest name, but Anthony Richardson stands out. Ugalele for Clemson. Van Dyke for Miami, even though Van Dyke isn't doing quite right. But these guys like that are bound to rise up draft boards. Cameron Ward, like you had mentioned before, guys with those physical aspects rise up boards because teams want a franchise guy.
Yeah. And to be fair, like when we talk about game managers, Mike doesn't like that term. We can just talk about, all right, who are the guys who basically rank somewhere between like 10 to 16 in the NFL in any given year at quarterback? That's essentially who we're talking about. Those are the guys where they're good enough you don't feel the immediate need to replace them at quarterback. But after maybe 3 or 4 years, you start to think, hey, this is kind of getting stale. We need to make a decision here about whether we're going to keep doing this or not. Those are who we're really talking about when we talk about game managers. You want to replace that term, it's guys who are like the 10 to 16 range. It's Derek Carr, it's Alex Smith, it's Kirk Cousins. It's those guys who you really don't know. Mac Jones, these guys you really don't know, are you ever going to be good enough for us to actually win a Super Bowl with? And in some instances, yeah, those guys have been. Talk about Joe Flacco, those kind of players. But you have historic defenses opposite of them. I mean, even when I talk about young Russell Wilson, young Ben Roethlisberger, those guys had really good defenses on the other side. They were not going out there beating you solely with their arms. And they had good running games too, for the most part. So it's not like even these young guys who eventually develop into superstars, it's not like they're winning out there just because of their arm. So most when we talk about game managers, some guys come into the league, develop into the superstars we know. But for guys who are qualifying that 10 to 16 range to really win Super Bowls, they have to have strong supporting casts throughout the entire team, specifically on defense usually.
So let's put a bow on our first episode back. Before we do, I want to remind our viewers to find the best place to bet for you. Head over to betting.net because betting.net offers expert and user reviews for every online sportsbook and casino in your state. So head on over to betting.net. Now, to put a bow on it, we couldn't end this episode without talking about Hendon Hooker. Hooker's probably the highest riser thus far of this draft season, of the early going of the season so far. They beat Alabama. He went absolutely off in that game. Now, coming into the year, Hooker wasn't really viewed like this. He's had his issues with accuracy, with his footwork, with his ball placement, and he did most of his damage before coming to Tennessee, mostly as a runner as opposed to a passer. But a lot of that has changed. Just how high do you think Hooker's draft stock can go at this rate? Do you see him as a legitimate top 10 pick at this point, or potentially down the road?
No, I don't think there's any shot he ever touches the top 10. I think there's a chance he can get back into the first round. Talking about picks 29, 30, 31, I think he can go there. I think he will be a top 50 pick if he keeps this up. Well, I don't view this as a guy who's going to go and seriously threaten to be a top 10 pick right now. Now, who knows? Maybe the rumors will come out around the Senior Bowl that, hey, people love this guy. He's going to be a top 15 pick, and maybe it happens. But I just don't see it with Hendon Hooker. I do like the physical tools. I don't think he has the best arm. He is one of the most productive downfield passers in college football this year. Scheme has a lot to do with that. I think that's one of the biggest issues is right now the scheme works because he does actually have a fair number of missed throws, but you can kind of forget about those because the scheme what they run at Tennessee, it's all about spacing. They have guys, basically 2 receivers who are all the way out, split out. You don't have many guys staying in the slot, so you have these huge open lanes between the offensive line and where the wide receivers are lined up, and it basically forces you to face a lot of light boxes because you have to have teams that can no longer keep their box player close to the line of scrimmage. You have very few players at the second level in the linebacker position, and even the safeties are split out wider. So it gives you a lot of space to work with in the middle, makes running the ball easier, especially for a quarterback like Hendon Hooker. What it also does is it allows you to read only half the field. So Hendon Hooker rarely goes through full field reads. He's usually just reading half of the field. And there are even plays in that playbook with Heichel at head coach where they're only reading one route. Essentially, the wide receivers are reading the defense, and the wide receiver determines what route he's going to run in that given play. And that is the route that everything's based off of. And Hendon Hooker's looking at that route. The other receivers are out there to try to create and manipulate the defense, but Hooker's not necessarily looking to read all those routes, just the one with the primary target on it. So that's going to be a concern with Hooker is that he really, really does not read the full field. This offense is very collegey, very gimmicky. He's not going to get nearly as much space in the NFL, and frankly, not as much time to throw because when you space it out so much, it just leaves your offensive line to really deal with guys. You have usually just 4-man pressures because you cannot get blitzed. There's no way for them to blitz you because if they do that, they're pulling guys out of coverage. It leaves more open space, especially over the middle of the field. That's just, basically pitch and catch essentially at that point because there's so much open space. Even look at what Alabama was doing defensively against Tennessee. Will Anderson was lining up inside the tackle, was lining over the guard because they had no personnel. They couldn't match up personnel-wise because they were only rushing 3 or 4 dudes sometimes. Will Anderson could not get his legitimate outside rushes going. He couldn't. So he was very non-impactful because of where he had to line up for most of the game. Situations like that make it very easy for someone like Hendon Hooker to pick up big numbers, especially because his physical talents amplify that as well. So when I look at that, it's really hard to evaluate him. The Senior Bowl will certainly give us some help there. If he goes on the All-Star circuit, it will help us out. But right now, scheme is a huge limiting factor, and there are some technical flaws to his game that lead to missed throws downfield. Some concerns with his footwork. It's a little bit all over the place at times. So I view him still as a day 2 pick, in my opinion.
A day 2 pick, so second, third round.
High day 2. We're talking about like a top 50 guy. Someone falls in that 31 to 50 range. I could see him sneaking in, again, the back end of the first round, the last 5 to 6 picks every year are wild cards, essentially. Or take a flyer on a guy you really like and see how he goes from there. So I could see him sneaking into the back end of the first round, but I view him more as a guy who goes in that 32 to 50 range.
Yeah, and for me, like you said, just to piggyback off what you said a little earlier with Hooker, he is one of the better deep ball passers in college football thus far this season. But my concerns with him are more within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. He hasn't really seen much success in the short passing game. For comparison of passes within 10 yards, he's only got, only, quote unquote, only got 5 touchdowns of his, he's got 17 or something like that thus far.
17 or 18, I believe.
Yeah, with only 1 interception. So I'd like to see him work more the short game. I know that's not part of their offense. Like you said, it's a lot of option routes for the receivers and whatnot, but that's something to keep an eye on moving forward. I think that's it. I think we've run out of time. We've touched on a bunch of different prospects. We've talked about your draft board. We've talked about a bunch of quarterbacks. We're back. We like to make this a consistent thing. Do it on Thursdays, 7:00, get on the air, hit you guys with some knowledge. And I do want to thank again Joseph Michael for chiming in earlier. If you're watching, don't hesitate to ask us any questions, any topics you want us to cover, any teams you want us to talk about, any positions of note you want us to touch on. Sam, why don't you tell the people your Twitter handle?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Sam_Teets33. I'm currently doing about 4 full draft profiles a week at this point.
Wow.
For various picks. So you can go and check those out. They're all posted on my Twitter account. You can find on my pinned tweet on my page, there's a link to my Substack, which is a newsletter, right, that has all those full draft reports as long as more content covering stock up, stock down for college players, and as well as weekly takeaways from the NFL.
Beautiful. And what's the Substack website?
It's called Sports Talk with Sam Teets. You go to substack.com, just search Sports Talk with Sam Teets, and you can find it there.
Perfect. Sam, do you have any final thoughts, questions, comments, concerns on quarterbacks?
No, I mean, there's a couple other guys I'm watching. Like, as crazy as to see, I might have to watch some Bo Nix at some point this year because he's done really well at Oregon. I can't look. I don't want to get into. We can't get into it, but
nope.
We might have to watch Bo Nix.
Gross. You know what we could do? We could do a film session, and we can watch some Bo Nix film, and we can break it down together on the air for our watchers and listeners. How's that sound?
Yeah, we could try it.
Pull it up on my screen.
Yeah, I don't. Bo Nix is so. It's such a weird story, but I'm telling you, man, I might have to watch some Bo Nix for real.
We'll touch on that for another day. We still got a lot of time till the draft and a lot of shows to do. So before we go, find the best place to bet for you. Wait, no, did I do this one already? I think I did that one already. So you know what?
I can't remember.
I'm going to do this one. Betting.net finds the best promotions, offers, and bonus codes, so you don't have to. Head over to their website, betting.net now, to take advantage of things like free bets and matching deposits. So for Sam Teets, I'm Dan Kornhauser. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll catch you guys next time.